polishing pads are an equally important aspect of hard water removal because they provide the direct physical contact with the surface. And because they do, they integrate all of the other components of the system, from the mechanical advantage being provided by the power tool, to the polishing powder, to the lubricant, and finally to the grit of the pad itself. Polishing pads provide 4 basic functions. First, they provide the direct physical contact to the surface. Second, they distribute the polishing powder to the surface. Third, they also distribute the water and lubrication to the surface. And fourth, they carry away the removed hard water debris. When choosing the right pad for your job, compare your pad choices by using the following characteristics. Grit, the degree of fineness for the polishing pad. Permeability, the ability to transfer and maintain the right consistency of lubrication and polishing powder to the surface. Attachment, the ability for the polishing pad to adhere to a backing plate during polishing. Durability, how long will the polishing pad last under different operating conditions? Reusable, can the polishing pad be used multiple times? Washable, can the polishing pad be cleaned so that it can be reused again? Many different types of pads can be used for polishing away hard water damage. Your choice of pad depends upon your specific operating condition. The grit of the polishing pad defines how soft or how rough it is. Now, we have a steel wool pad which is made out of bronze wool. We have a steel wool pad which is made out of real steel wool. And now we have a nylon pad which is made out of real nylon. Now, each of these pads is going to have a different grit to it, meaning that it's going to have a different degree of fineness. That fineness is going to make a big difference when that pad is rotating and having pressure on the glass. The nylon pads are the softest pads. These are very fine grit, and they're very, very soft, and these are ideal for sensitive surfaces. The steel wool pads have a little bit higher grit, they're a little bit rougher, and they can be used on those jobs that have more calcium deposits and that are more thicker, and in cases where you need a stronger grit to remove the hard water. The bronze is very, very similar to the steel wool pads for the grit. It's basically made out of the same material, except these are bronze wool fibers instead of steel fibers. Again, these two pads should be used when you need additional polishing power. You're on? Okay. Permeability or absorption is an important characteristic for polishing pads. Many pads will have a tendency to absorb too much moisture. And what happens there is that instead of having the water on the glass, where it's really needed for the cleaning and polishing and lubrication, instead the water is being sucked up into the backing of the polishing pad. Now that causes several problems because the glass has a tendency to dry out, and that means that you're now polishing directly on the glass without any lubrication. Now you're going to find those kind of situations with a high absorption when you have backing pads that are made out of felt or made out of other textiles that absorb water. One of the big benefits for the Scrubbie Pro 5-inch nylon pads is that these pads do not absorb water. Instead, they're permeable. They allow the water to soak into the pad very evenly, but they're able to keep that water on the glass, which means that you're going to be able to polish for a longer period of time without stopping, and that makes your jobs more efficient. Another nice thing about these types of nylon pads is that when they do absorb water, they have a tendency to absorb the water evenly over the entire surface area. A pad like this, for example, or a pad like this, because of the backing material, it's going to absorb in a rather small area, and you're going to have a harder time keeping these pads evenly lubricated and wet throughout the entire 5-inch diameter. So for that reason, when working with hard water removal, the Scrubbie Pros are ideal for permeability, absorption, and the ability to carry the water and put it on the glass for a longer period of time. Another important aspect of the permeability of the pad is the ability of the pad to absorb and to distribute the cleaning powder or the polishing material that we're working with. Now, in many cases, we use our Mr. Hardwater polishing powder. The Mr. Hardwater polishing powder needs to be absorbed and spread across the surface of the glass, like so, and also on the pad. The nylon pads do a terrific job in distributing all that polishing material throughout the entire 5-inch area, and that's a real plus. The other types of pads, however, are not as able to distribute that material as evenly as the nylon pads. A lot of times the powders can get clumped up into the center of the pads, and that creates an uneven distribution of polishing. The permeability and absorption of the pad is also an important characteristic for distributing any kind of stain remover or solvent, like the Winning Brands or Winning Colors solvent, and also our lubricant and cleaning compound, which is our soap. So the pads have a very important function with distributing the water, lubrication, and the solvent when doing polishing. So when you're ranking and rating and choosing your pads, be very aware of which pads are going to be able to do the best job with distributing the polishing powder, the soaps, and the stain removers and the solvents to the glass. Another important factor to consider when choosing a polishing pad for your hard water removal job is the ability of the pad to attach to the 5-inch backing plate. Now, most types of materials can attach to the backing plate because the backing plates are made out of a hook and loop material. The problem with felt type pads and materials such as this, which is a backing material, is that this material gets caught into the hook and loop hooks here, and you have to spend time with a wire brush cleaning it out. Now that's not the case with the nylon scrubbies. These adhere very well because the netting material is able to sink its way into the teeth of the hook and loops, and it attaches very, very well. Also, with the abrasion that's occurring and the additional friction, sometimes you start to wear the backing part out, but it's not a problem. You don't have to clean it with a wire brush. All you have to do is simply pull off the webbing material out of the backing plate. So the nylon scrubbie pads rank very, very high on the attachment to the backing plate. The durability of the pad is also a very important characteristic when choosing a pad for hard water removal. The durability of the pad is dependent upon many different things, and the durability is going to determine how often you run through these pads and how long they're going to last for you when you're doing these jobs. Obviously, you want a pad that's going to last as long as possible to keep your material costs down so you can make more profit on each and every job. Now, as far as durability goes, one of the most important factors that degrade these pads is the RPM speeds and the pressure that you're applying to the pads. Lower RPMs and lower pressure will make your pads last longer. Higher RPMs, because of the increased friction, will wear your pads out faster. That's especially the case if you're not keeping the proper lubrication on the glass. The worst case scenario for the pad durability is with the steel wool pads when they're operated at high RPM and low lubrication. Why? Because of the increased friction of the pad against the glass. You're creating so much friction that you're basically wearing out these pads too quickly. One thing about the durability on these steel wool pads, what you do not want to do is run through all these steel wool fibers and start polishing on the backing material. The backing material does not perform well when on glass. In fact, with the backing material with high RPMs and low lubrication, you can actually swirl the glass. So that's why it's recommended to use the Scrubbie Pro nylon pads. They are very, very durable when operated at lower RPMs and with low lubrication. Because these pads are able to retain their lubrication longer, it makes these pads more durable. Finally, the reusability and washability of the pads is an important factor when determining which polishing pad to choose when you're doing your hard water removal. One of the advantages of the Nylon Scrubbie Pro pad is that these can be washed and reused. For example, this pad's been used many times already on previous jobs, and to wash it, all I really need to do is rinse it in some water, and it's almost like new. Now, on the back of this, we have a little bit of a black excess material, and that's because I was actually polishing the frame around a window. What I really like about these Nylon Scrubbie Pros is that if I want to do some hard water removal now, all I need to do is remove this layer of netting from the pad, and I'm back to having a really good pad that I can just keep reusing. So I'll rinse it one more time. And almost all of that black material is out. This is a clean pad, and I'm ready to go again. Now, this is much more difficult to do with one of our steel wool bronze pads. The way to touch these pads up is with a steel brush. You can actually kind of do this to rough them up a little bit and to kind of clean them up. You can remove the excess powder, etc., to make these reusable. However, they're not as reusable as the Scrubbie Pros. For example, compare the backing material after several jobs of the steel wool bronze pad versus the Scrubbie Pro. Now the Scrubbie Pro, all we have is an additional snake skin that we can just peel off and keep going. With the backing material on the bronze steel wool pads, we have a very fluffed up area here that creates a lot of problems with the backing plate. The Nylon Scrubbie Pro pads are the most forgiving pads that we offer today. They're the most forgiving because they handle the lubrication the best, they handle RPMs the best, and they last the longest. One of the reasons that they last a long time is because they're made with a nylon webbing that's overlapped on itself between 15 to 18 times. And what I like about these is as you're running down the pads, they're simply tearing away a layer of the netting material. It's almost like a snake skin that's shedding its skin. So when you start running through these pads, all you have to do is simply tear off a layer and just keep polishing. You still have many layers left to keep going. Another important factor for the durability of these pads and why they're so good is you can even flip them over and start polishing with the other side. That's something you can't do with the steel wool pads. Now, when you start polishing these pads down too far, you're going to start ending up polishing on the backing material, which can create unwanted swirls and even scratches if you're operating at high RPMs and low lubrication.